Module 1 and Module 2 have been designed to go together. Module 2 continues on the thought of what is reading, what is literacy, but focuses on why teach content literacy. Here's an analogy for you to think about. Analogies in the classroom are great ways to spark critical and creative thinking because you actually have to work on them to make sense out of them, and they're very simple. You're using visual or word images to make some comparisons, contrasts, find connections. These are some great strategies to use with students. So here's one. Content knowledge is to content literacy as an automobile is to an engine. So if we were to explain that, what are the connections? How does an automobile and an engine go together? An engine makes an automobile run. Therefore, we can figure that content literacy must make content knowledge work or run. While knowledge of subject matter is the framework, it needs something to propel it. Content literacy strategies are vehicles to transport students beyond rote learning to higher order thinking. So it's having those strategies and those skills of literacy can propel you into, it's the fuel and the engine that propels you into greater content knowledge. Without that, your content knowledge is going to be limited. Why content area literacy? Well, if not you, then who? It all goes back to the way reading is defined, back to Module 1, all the way back to the earliest years in school. For a long time, it has been believed that first you learn to read and then you read to learn. And you will still hear this said, and you'll read about it in reports. In this philosophy, reading development is seen as consisting of two separate, different, and sequential stages. Children learn to read in the primary grades, and they read to learn in the intermediate grades. The problem with this is comprehension and nonfiction reading are not taught in the elementary schools. So when they come to the secondary schools, where the definition of reading is, well, you know how to decode, so you know how to understand everything you're reading, then it gets back to, if not you, then who? No one is teaching these children how to use the texts that they've learned how to read, that they've learned how to decode earlier. The assumption is not true. While you do need to learn how to read, you simply can't wait until that happens to learn about comprehension. The two happen together. That goes back to the whole reason we read. We decode text to make meaning. The making meaning is the comprehension part. If children don't understand that from the very beginning, they truly struggle with even figuring out why they're learning how to decode. This assumes that children don't need to understand anything until they can decode. Why would they bother learning how to read at all if they don't understand what they're reading? Learning how to read and learning about comprehension should go hand in hand from the very start to the very end of a child's formal education. One of my favorite terms from a writer is assumicide. It is assumed that students can transfer the skills and strategies learned for reading fiction automatically, independently, and successfully to nonfiction reading. By grades 3 and 4, students are expected to have and use skills in report writing, reading and understanding, content area text or trades, and standardized testing, predominantly written in expository genre. Although the assumption has been that students would automatically transfer their newly acquired skills to expository text reading, research has repeatedly shown that basic word recognition and comprehension skills are not sufficient for students to cope with more complex materials and reading tasks. So basically, no one is teaching the children how to deal with the more complex expository reading. Far beyond reading a text or trade book, students need to be able to select information, analyze it, summarize it, put it in their own words, and deliver a nicely synthesized report or project, not to mention interact in some meaningful way with it. And when is this taught? Assumicide. These kids can't read. It all depends on how you define reading. The report called Reading Next, some 70% of older readers, both between 4th and 12th grade, require some form of remediation. Very few of these older struggling readers need help to read the words on a page. Their most common problem is that they are not able to comprehend what they read. This report strongly recommends literacy, reading and writing programs for the bulk of middle and high school students. A crucial element of such a program would be effective literacy instructional principles embedded in content, for example, math class, including language arts teachers using content area texts and content area teachers providing instruction and practice in reading and writing skills specific to their subject area. And yes, I did add the emphasis, but that's extremely important. Historically, explicit literacy instruction has been supported up to the 3rd grade. However, there is a glaring need for it to continue so students can not only read narrative text, but also learn specific strategies to derive meaning from expository and descriptive text. When literacy instruction stops early, how can middle and high school students learn the strategies to read increasingly difficult text and to comprehend more abstract ideas? If a regular student continues to need instruction to read and comprehend the text found in secondary textbooks, consider the tremendous need for instruction and intervention that struggling readers must require. And sadly, if students 2 or 3 grade levels behind their peers do not receive intensive literacy instruction, the results can be devastating because the struggling reader will not experience success within the content areas. So you have students who come into middle and high school struggling with reading. They're thrown into difficult content areas and often not supported with those content area textbooks. They're just getting reading intervention in English, say, or language arts. And this is a real problem for these students because they know they can't read in the content area and they end up hating the subjects and feeling like failures. Therefore, it becomes even more critical that secondary content area teachers better understand and teach specific literacy strategies to help students read and extract meaning from the written material used to teach the course content. One thing we know, the research is clear, the research has been going on for a long, long time, is that proficient readers, those who read and make sense of text, utilize a variety of strategies independently and effectively. If you memorize anything, memorize these strategies because these are really important. And remember that, and we'll go over this in the next module more, a strategy is the student's plan for learning. How are they going to figure out whatever this is? The strategies over here on the side are pretty much the common ones that are talked about in all the research. Clarifying, making connections, rereading, monitoring for meaning, determining importance, visualizing, summarizing, asking questions, predicting, hypothesizing, inferring, and synthesizing. In fact, when you did your difficult text reading from Palmero in Module 1, you probably relied on a lot of these strategies to get you through the text because you are good readers and so you know to use these. You might not know you're using them, but you are. These are some wonderful resources that are not required for this class, that are really all essential reading pieces that you should read to be a reading expert. So Mosaics of Thought, absolutely wonderful. Stephanie Harvey and her colleague Ann Gudvis have done a lot of great work. They have a great book on nonfiction matters. And Pearson has done a lot of research and comprehension in reading. What we know, meaning and motivation are not possible without a sense of active engagement in text. Again, back to Module 1, the socio-psycholinguistic aspects of reading. Students just don't like to read nonfiction. They're bored and uninterested. These are all quotes from different books. It's mostly Stephanie Harvey's books. It's painfully clear that they are not comprehending anything more than superficial meanings. I've often told them that they read the way they watch TV. They just sit there in a daze. They're reading, but they're so passive. And if you've taught middle and high school students, you've seen all of these 3 things manifested over and over again. Active readers use strategies, interact with the text on a personal level, and make meaning during reading. Passive readers wait for the text to act upon them. And what happens, we know? It never does. In too many classrooms, it is the teacher who is actively engaged, while the students assume a passive stance toward learning. Assigning and telling are still common teaching practices and often have the unfortunate consequences of dampening students' active involvement in learning. So what happens to students between birth and grade 3 or 4? Because we know they start out excited and they want to be active and they want to interact. And by the time we get them in grades 3 or 4, they're already exhibiting this passive behavior down here. No one has taught students the codes they need to read and understand their content areas. They rely on other strategies. If students learn anything, they learn that they don't have to read course material because there are alternative routes to acquiring the information. The end result is passive reading or no reading at all. And I'm sure you probably know a lot of people who have gotten through school with passive reading or no reading at all. There are two main problems with reading in secondary subject fields right now. First, the students are reading the wrong stuff. They read too many textbooks and not enough real books and articles. And second, they don't understand what they're reading. While we assign plenty of reading, we don't teach kids how to understand and remember what they read, and this is from one of your class textbooks, Subjects Matter. So why content area literacy instruction? Teaching students how to make sense out of the print they've already learned to decode, teaching students how to comprehend ideas that have been embedded in the text and apply those ideas to the content area concepts, teaching students how to read your subject area's unique type of writing, codes, and style, but most importantly, you're teaching them how to think. All content area teachers need to include in their instruction comprehension strategies, navigation of text structures, the use of graphic organizers, independent thinking processes, consistent support and instruction before, during, and after our students read or write. And that last point we will focus on for several of the modules in this class.